Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. I'm Dr. Vidya Kalaramadam, Professor of Women's and Gender Studies in the Department of Community and Social Justice Studies. And I'm also the co-chair of the organizing committee for this conference. We are gathered here for the 13th Contexts Conference, hosted by the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. Held every year, this conference brings us together to celebrate, debate, learn, and clarify topics that matter to us the most. This year, our focus is on youth rights and well-being, from the mental to the material to the digital. Today, this conference will bring in leading voices to help us think about a set of issues, ranging from exploring ideas of how you can thrive under pressure, regulating the presence of social media in our lives, viewing trauma in all its iterations to attend to the polycrisis of our times, striving to make this a livable planet and seeking to heal the wounds of gun violence. I thank you all for being here, getting seated, QR coding your attendance. If you are seeking your leadership badges, please contact Margaret Ayala Wallace from the Office of Campus Activities, Leadership, and Service. Whether you are here through coercion or nudging, or a promise of extra credits, or a guarantee of badges, I would invoke what feminist Adrienne Rich said 4 decades ago. If you are here, claim your education. So be curious, tweet your learnings, and enjoy the sessions. Like all events, this conference, too, is the work of many. Thanks to Dean Watina Davis, whose vision has today become a legacy of the college, to Associate Dean Jana Hill for your participative and delegative leadership, to all the committee members who are here, Dr. Jemor Maddox, Professor of Psychology, for co-chairing the committee with me, to Dr. Rose Sasoto, Professor of English, Dr. Angie Yu, Professor of Communications, Dr. Dennis Usil, Professor of Sociology, Dr. Carl Bulaya, Professor of Music, and Dr. Ellen Fry, Professor of Languages. We also thank Associate Dean Lauren Sedano and Director of Digital Learning Jim Miles for media materials and outreach, and all the staff personnel from hospitality, custodial to secretarial to technical support that made today possible. I now invite the Provost Powers to give the opening remarks.
Good morning, everyone. Oh, we can do much better than that. Good morning, everyone. All right, it is a pleasure to see you all here this morning and not have to compete with another voice in my background, so thank you very much. So yes, I'm the provost here at William Patterson. For us students here, you may not know what a provost is, but I'm the senior academic officer. I report to the president, and I work with all the faculty and the deans to make sure that you have 2 things you get from your education. 1, an opportunity for a meaningful job graduating from here, and or opportunity to go to graduate school. So that's what we think about every day, and I'm excited to be in that world. So by way of a brief introduction, from me at least to this group, I spent some time reflecting on what I wanted to say in my welcome. I decided to offer my own personal context, drawn from my monthly message to the faculty and staff a few weeks ago that happened to be on this exact theme, and I hope you'll see where I'm tying in student wellness and youth rights to this. Some here may have read it, but the students likely did not. But I thought I would share a piece of it again orally as a way to frame the day, at least is how I've been thinking about it of late. So here it goes. You're like, what's he going to tell us? So I've been thinking a lot about the brain lately, that extraordinary tool we all have to process thoughts, emotions, and memories, and to enable learning and creativity. My mother has dementia. Her brain has failing neuroplasticity, manifesting in her progressive inability at recall. that critical tool for daily human interaction and processing of information. Yet at present, it seems to have brought her a kind of peace, one that is simply about being in a moment versus forming and articulating an opinion about it. She projects what appears to be deep listening and a kind of outward love that wasn't really in her wheelhouse before. For instance, she smiles almost constantly and has never hugged me quite so tightly before when I would see her, or say the words, "I love you," as she does now. Intellectually, I sort of understand this. Emotionally, I actually like it, even though I hate what is happening to her. Selfishly, I find myself somewhat envious that she doesn't seem concerned about all the negative things swirling in our world. The other reason I've been thinking about the brain is a generational one, triggered by podcasts by U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Vivek Murthy, one about social media and young people's mental health, the other about parents trying to navigate it. It got me thinking about a powerful moment I had with one of my daughters a few years ago, in which we found ourselves reflecting on what life was like for each of us emerging from college. For me, it was filled with optimism. The US and its values were on top. Communism had failed, and the market economy seemed to bring prosperity and opportunity through individual initiative. For her, the world had a kind of darkness to it. When standing on a subway platform, for instance, as a matter of routine, she'd observantly look for a place to hide or duck in the event of a mass shooting. I can't say I ever worry about such a thing. And as a society, what have we done to take away her rights to feel safe and in the environment in which we live? Whether the advent of social media caused that, I cannot say. But I did find myself reflecting on my two bookends, my mother and my daughter, the former who seemed blissfully unaware or not caring about chaos, and the latter who I fatherly wanted to assuage her worry. I also know we have many young people enrolled at William Patterson. From there in my message, I made a connection to the fact that in a few weeks, the campus will be holding its annual Wellness Day, a moment for us to come together as a community of faculty and staff while students were away on break to reflect on how we can aid student wellness, as well as our own wellness. This context conference, in my mind, is a natural extension of that. What a great set of presentations lined up that are focused on different ways to think about student well-being and youth rights. No doubt we will all have something to learn with respect to such things as the challenges of social media and technologies, the urgencies and impact of climate change, educational inequities, and how to thrive under pressure. Let me also offer personal thanks to the leadership of the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences for once again organizing a thoughtful and provocative program, and that is equally as so as last year's topic on AI. And thank you to the presenters for what you're about to do for and with us. So let me close with a quote from the Surgeon General, who I referenced earlier and is raising all sorts of alarm bells around student wellness and rights implications. He had this to say about the importance of connection. We need to build a people-centered life where relationships are the priority. When we are more connected to each other, we are better at work and in life. Although I doubt we will solve the challenges of student well-being and wellness and youth rights today, the fact that we are seeking to make a dent in it through community at this conference, I think, gives us a fighting chance. Thank you, and I return the podium.
Thank you, Provost Powers. Let's take 10 seconds to read the land acknowledgement. Land acknowledgements allow us to recognize and acknowledge our settler colonial past, the forced displacement of indigenous and enslaved peoples, violence of development and resistance, and our continued commitment to enable the building of indigenous communities of power. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our panelists. Dr. Noah Kageyama, who will be the first speaker, is a performance psychologist who is on the faculty of Julliard School, the Cleveland Institute of Music, and the New World Symphony. Formerly a conservatory-trained violinist with degrees from Oberlin and Julliard before completing a Ph.D. in counseling psychology from Indiana University. Dr. Kageyama specializes in teaching musicians on how to utilize sports psychology principles, conducts workshops on performance enhancement to overcoming performance anxiety, and authors the Bulletproof Musician blog and podcast, which reaches over 100,000 monthly readers. Welcome. Dr. Linda Charmaraman comes to us from Wellesley College, where she is a senior research scientist and the director of Youth, Media, and Wellbeing Research Lab. Dr. Charmaraman has a Ph.D. in Human Development and Education from UC Berkeley, and her research interests include positive youth development, social media and adolescent health, digital citizenship, and understanding well-being at the intersectionality of social identities, particularly racial, ethnic, social orientation, socioeconomic, and sociopolitical identities, and civic engagement. She has also provided testimony to the U.S. Senate Committee on Protecting Children Online and has been a media expert consultant, principal investigator on several grants and projects, and featured in the media numerous times. Welcome to both of you. Thanks for accepting our invitation. The floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Before we get started, I want to do a quick game of epic or fail before we get into this. So this is Skimbles. Skimbles is from New Zealand. I don't know Skimbles personally, I just read the description in YouTube. But Skimbles is going to do a thing, but before Skimbles does its thing, I just want you to guess whether you think it's going to be epic or fail. So let's take a quick look here. Oh. Okay. So that didn't quite work out the way I'd hoped. Obviously, it was a fail. The pauses apparently aren't going to work the way I hoped. Anyhow, so how many of you can empathize with poor Skimbles? Maybe you've had similar things happen, whether it's asking somebody on a date or a sports or music situation. Okay, so we're performing all the time, every day probably. There are sports performances. How many of you are athletes or have been athletes? How many of you are musicians or have been musicians? And the rest of you, I'm sure, are taking tests, doing job interviews, having difficult conversations with family members, significant others, roommates, and coworkers, and so forth. So these are all everyday performances. And because they don't always go the way that we would like, it's easy to sometimes maybe just conclude that we're not all born performers, and that some of us can do it, some of us maybe not so much under pressure. Or sometimes we start assuming that maybe we just have to work harder. We have to practice harder, we have to train harder, we have to study more, or we just need more experience, at which point somehow something will click and we'll be able to perform more effectively. Of course, a lot of times we do put that effort in and we still don't meet our standards, and so it can be easy to assume that maybe we just don't have it in us. How many of you have had that moment where you start questioning whether you have what it takes to be successful in some area that's important to you? Yeah, and it's really hard to come up with answers in those sorts of moments. And so, for what it's worth, the research suggests that performing effectively under pressure is a skill. There are lots of different things involved in being able to do this more effectively. And it can be really empowering to discover that these are things that we can get better at with the right kind of practice and training and preparation, a lot of it mental in nature. So there are two things that I wanted to do in the time that we have together. My advisor in grad school would often say, if you misdiagnose the problem, you're probably going to misdiagnose the solution. And so I wanted to make sure all of you came away from today with a clear understanding of the relationship between nerves and anxiety and performance. And I also wanted to share with you a tool that a lot of athletes and musicians also have used over decades to be able to more effectively perform their best when it really matters the first time. So first off, the stress response in terms of understanding that relationship between nerves and performance. I think it's very easy to intuitively have this idea that if we could just be calm in interviews, in tests, and performances, that we would be able to perform more like ourselves. How many of you have had this idea that if I could just be calm and just be a normal sort of state, that I'd be able to do better? Of course, when you look at our own experiences, when you look at the research, that's not really how it works. How many of you have actually had really great performances or done really well, even though you've been nervous? Yeah, and how many of you have had not so good performances when you've been too calm? Right, so we understand that this is not how it works. A lot of times you'll see this inverted U hypothesis. And the performance being upside down was not an intentional thing. I think just the transfer from Keynote to PowerPoint does weird things. In any case, this is the sort of Goldilocks idea that there's this moderate level of activation or anxiety where we tend to have our best performances. And of course, this is an oversimplification of things as well. Sometimes we have our best performances at a lower range, sometimes at a higher range, and sometimes in the middle. But this is also not the whole picture, because it turns out the stress response has multiple components. There's this cognitive component of nerves, and there's also a somatic or physical component of nerves. So just real quick, the physical stuff. I'm sure if you think back to times where you've felt stressed or under pressure in performance situations, you remember getting tight physically, perhaps. There's also a tendency for your blood vessels to constrict, so your hands get cold. How many of you remember your hands getting cold when you're nervous? Sweaty, perhaps, also, because your heart rate tends to go up and your heart's beating faster, you start overheating, and you start sweating in all the places that you normally sweat, not just your hands or in your core. So that's why you have now cold, freezing hands, but also they're clammy and sweaty and uncomfortable. Our breathing tends to change. Sometimes we tend to hold our breath. How many of you have noticed like not breathing under pressure, like you just hold your breath? Yeah, and sometimes we breathe more rapidly, more shallowly, and our non-essential systems go offline. So if any of you have ever noticed getting dry mouth under pressure when you need to speak or when you need to do an interview, it's because your digestive system has decided it's not a priority under pressure, so those things tend to happen. In terms of the mental stuff, there are a lot of things that happen, but primarily attentional changes, so we tend to be more attuned to threats, we worry about things, we get distracted, our mind blanks out. Lots of different things in that area can happen as well. And so the reason why it seems to be really important to separate out the physical and the mental is that they have two different effects on performance, and we have two different goals in these pressure situations. On the physical side, it does seem like that inverted U hypothesis is pretty helpful. A moderate level of physical activation tends to be pretty useful for performance. Too high, and that's not so great. Too low, also not so great. But on the mental side of things, the less the better. The less worried you are, the less distracted you are, the less doubts and fears and second guessing and hesitancy and so forth, the better you're likely to perform. And if you had to pick just one, it seems from a lot of the research that we're going to perform our best when we can minimize the mental aspect of nerves. The physical stuff, not as predictive of performance. And the other good thing too is really we don't have to be completely calm. We just have to avoid getting sucked into this sort of anxiety spiral that a lot of times we get sucked into. I don't know how many of you have noticed, whether it's waiting outside the room for a test or before a performance backstage or before an important athletic event, you're feeling okay. But then as the moment gets closer, you start feeling a little bit nervous, which makes you worry about the fact that you're starting to get nervous, which makes you more nervous, which makes you worry more. Has that ever happened for anybody? Yeah, so these are the sorts of things we want to be able to prevent. And again, the mental side is really the one that if we could control one of them, that's the one that I would spend more time on. So how do we minimize the mental aspect of nerves? How do we control the physical side of things? This is where pre-performance routines comes into the equation. This is something that athletes and musicians and other folks have used to be able to really put their best foot forward when it counts and when it matters. I'm sure you've all seen these, whether you enjoy watching basketball or football or baseball or golf or even Olympic sports. Athletes, oftentimes subtly, but sometimes not so subtly, will engage in these routines right before performing a skill. And so I wanted to share some from basketball because they tend to be kind of quirky and individualistic, and I'm sure you've seen some of these in action. So let's take a quick look here.
Let's talk about your most memorable free throw tradition. You know, a lot of people have certain routines. They'll hit side of their face, hit their chest, bounce the ball a certain way. Who do you think, do you remember all the time seeing on TV going, I know exactly what he's going to do right now at the free throw line?
The one that kind of annoyed me was Carl Malone would say something. No one knows. I don't know what he was saying. That's what annoyed me. I just like, God, what is he saying? No one knows what he said. No one understood what he was saying in the line, but he was speaking a lot. Nah, he wasn't telling nobody. No one knows.
I would say Rip Hamilton. He takes 2 bounces forward, then he brings to the side, then he shoots the free throw.
Hamilton, a lethal shooter at 88%.
I still couldn't figure out like how Julius think shoot the free throw and he bent so low, both legs, and watching him really makes me, hurt in my legs.
Jeff Horner said what he said to his kids.
Horner said he kind of stretched the side of his face, and I don't know if he blew a kiss in that, but every time he got to the free throw line, he would rub the side of his face.
I think it was Alonzo Mourning. He would always touch his chin and his forehead. I think it was. With the sweatband. I think it was wristband, yeah.
Not the weirdest one, but I think the one everybody recognized now is Gilbert Arenas.
Probably Gilbert.
I seen Gilbert do someone, behind the back. Goes behind his back. Puts the behind his back 3 times and shoots the free throw.
That's what we got to go in the back. This afternoon, Washington will go on to win this game.
So there's nothing magic about any of those routines, but the consistency of the routines does seem to be really important. There was a study, I think maybe in about 2008, where they looked at a bunch of playoff games in the NBA to find out how much of a difference the consistency of these routines really made on free throw shooting percentage. Turns out it was about 13% difference. If they deviated from the routine, they shot about 13% worse. And then they actually calculated how many points that equaled. It was about 4 points per game. And I think in these the 2 conference semifinal series, 4 of the games were decided by 4 points or less. So it ended up having a real impact on the outcome. So the question then is, well, what should this look like for a regular sort of performance, whether you're taking the MCATs or whether you're just taking calculus tests, next week, or going in for an interview or performing in some way in music or sports? Well, there are a number of different elements that you could incorporate into your routines, but there are 2 or 3 primary elements that I wanted to share with you as far as developing your own routine goes. There are a couple physical elements, and then there's a key mental visualization related element that I wanted to have you practice. So the first thing, you can probably guess what one of the first physical elements is, and this has to do with breathing. Breathing has become a really popular. There are apps nowadays. Those of you who are fans of Stephen Curry, his trainer, Brandon Payne, does a lot with breathing and managing breathing and monitoring breathing in games and in practice. And one thing that Stephen Curry does after he's done all these drills and trained really hard, he's out of breath, they'll put him on his back on the court, put a sandbag on his chest, and have him practice breathing diaphragmatically so that he can regulate his breathing, get better at breathing effectively. There are a number of different ways in which to breathe, and I just wanted to share a couple with you in case this is a little bit new for you or you haven't practiced breathing much in the past. There was a study that came out very recently, actually, 2023, where they looked at 3 different kinds of breathing to compare how effective each one would be in terms of regulating stress and anxiety and mood and so forth. And there was one that was more effective than the others, and it's called either the cyclic sigh or physiological sigh. You've probably at this point seen some of it on TikTok or Instagram or social media. But I just wanted to walk through it with you to get a sense of how it feels and also how it works. So I don't know if you can hear or see from that distance, but I'll demonstrate what it looks like. It's basically a double inhale and then a long, slow exhale. How many of you have done any babysitting or have young cousins or have seen little kids cry? Okay, so at the end of the crying, maybe you've seen the sort of shuddering phase where it's like that sort of thing. How many of you have seen this? If you've had to be responsible for this, it's difficult to try to settle the kid down, and you're happy when you start seeing this happen. It seems to be related to this. So it's a little bit more controlled. This double inhale looks a little bit like this. So try this with me. Just a couple of these. Just inhale and then top it off with another inhale and then a long, slow exhale through the mouth. It's all together. And then one more. So my guess is most of you are maybe not fully awake anyhow, but having done that, how many of you feel even more like not awake, like your energy's gone down a little bit? Could maybe go back to bed for a little bit? Yeah, okay. So a lot of times just doing this for a few minutes will, not even a few minutes, just a few seconds, will often settle you back down. If you have difficulty getting to sleep at night, it's the sort of thing that can be helpful. In the study, people did it for a few weeks, about 5 minutes a day, and they found that their resting breathing rate even was lower than the other folks who did the other kinds of breathing. So this can be a useful thing to do, even if you don't do it for a few minutes every day. There's another breathing hack that I wanted to share with you that involves a little bit of imagery. It's going to seem a little bit silly, but sometimes we can start overthinking the breathing, which makes it hard to breathe effectively. It's a form of what's called analogical instruction, where if you give somebody an analogy, they're often able to execute the complex skill more effectively than when they think about the details of it too much. So in this particular example, again, it's kind of a goofy image, but the idea is to imagine that you're wearing a belt around your waist, but this belt is a very peculiar belt that's made up of a chain of noses. Like you had some cannibal friend who had a bunch of noses lying around and they gifted you this belt of noses. So I want you to imagine that you're wearing this belt of noses, and then as you take in a few deep breaths, imagine you're breathing in through the front of your stomach, the sides, and then the back as well. So just take a couple moments, maybe close your eyes, imagine the belt of noses, take a few deep breaths through your waist. How many of you feel like you've been able to get a deeper breath a little bit more easily through that way? Yeah. So especially if you're an athlete or especially if you're a musician, this is the sort of thing that can be really helpful to do right before you perform a skill, or if you're winded or if you feel like you need to regulate your activation state a little bit more. So that's the breathing component. We'll talk a little bit about releasing tension here in a second, but the other key element is having a really clear goal in mind. And this seems really obvious, but there's a tendency for us to focus on what we don't want to do in these moments of high stress and performance, like don't screw this up, don't forget to do that, don't mess up. In the movies, you'll often see people say, don't look down. And then as soon as you tell somebody don't look down when they're hanging from a really precarious position, it's very tempting to look down. And so they look down, they panic, they freak out, and then they fall, and then that's it for that character. So the idea in those situations, not that you would ever want to be in that situation, is if you're trying to help your friend, tell them what to do, right? So keep your eyes on me. You know, instead of saying don't look down, say look up, look here. So similarly, there's a golf study that I like where they had a bunch of people imagine missing the hole, or they had a bunch of people imagine making the putt. Another group didn't imagine anything at all. And as you can probably guess, the group that imagined missing was more likely to miss, and they tended to miss by more than the group that imagined making the putt or nothing at all. So the idea, whatever it is that you're doing, if you're a musician, the idea is to imagine the very opening of the piece that you're about to play and what that's going to sound like. If you're an athlete, it means imagining where you want the ball to go. If you're playing darts, if you're playing billiards, if you're throwing a ball, if you're serving a ball in tennis, like it's all about where do you want the ball to go, or what do you want this to look like when you execute this skill. In the case of public speaking, it might be more along the lines of trying to remember how you want that first sentence to go, or that first phrase to go, or the kind of energy that you want to project to the back of the hall when you start speaking, or hearing the sound of your voice in your head, or in an interview, just remembering the kind of energy and the confidence that you want to portray, and so forth. So this initially will take you a little bit of time to do, and this is where practice comes into the equation. So I wanted to practice a little bit with you because the goal is to be able to get into this more grounded and centered and present state in about 10 to 15 seconds at most. But when you start practicing this, it might take you more like a minute or two even to get into this place. So what I'd like to do is just walk you through it maybe once. We'll see how much time we have. Yeah, maybe just the once. Just to give you a sense of how it might feel. So let me see if I can get this mic to work. Testing. Okay. So what I'd like you to do is whatever you have on your laps, just put it down so that you can sit comfortably in your chair. You can do this eyes open, eyes closed. Either's fine. If you're doing it eyes open, don't look at me. Just look at the back of the chair in front of you, or a really boring spot on the ground, just so you're not distracted by other thoughts that might pop in as you look up here and see different things that'll trigger thoughts. That's why I like eyes closed, because it's just easier to avoid distractions. But sometimes for some folks, eyes closed is more distracting. So whatever's easy for you is fine. So let's start with the breathing. Inhale through your nose, exhale through your nose or mouth. Again, belt of noses if that's comfortable for you and if that feels like it resonates. But as you breathe, there are a couple things that I'd like you to pay attention to. The first thing is how the air sounds. So as you inhale, the air might sound a particular way. As you exhale, perhaps the sound of the air changes. As you continue to breathe, I'd also like you to pay attention to how the air feels. On the inhale, the air might be a little bit cooler, a little bit drier. As you exhale, perhaps the air is a little bit warmer. So then, as you continue to breathe, I'd also like you to start scanning for tension and releasing tension. So maybe starting at the top of your head with your forehead and your eyes, to a quick scan for tension. If you find some, just on the exhale, feel that tension melting or dissolving away on your breath. Work down your mouth and jaw. Then your neck, shoulders, upper back. Feel your arms loosening up, elbows, hands and fingers. As you work down your torso, you might feel yourself sinking, getting heavier in the chair underneath you. As you work down your quads, hamstrings, you might find tension even in your knees. Feel the tension releasing out of your toes, arches, and feet. As you continue to feel tension melting away, now imagine perhaps you're going to give a speech or go in for a job interview or take a test. Just want you to imagine what that initial moment is going to feel like, what it's going to sound like, the kind of energy that you want as you initiate that skill. Or if you play an instrument or you're an athlete, think of a sports skill or the opening of a musical piece that you would like to start. And just visualize how that's going to sound, how that's going to feel physically, maybe even mentally, emotionally, in your head as you continue to breathe and release tension. Then as that becomes clear, as you can hear exactly how you want that to go, see how you want that to go, just imagine getting ready to execute or perform that skill, and then without hesitation, just go for it. Okay, that's the gist. It's relatively quick, it's straightforward. I'm just curious, how many of you feel, again, like your energy has gone down a little bit from going through that? Great. How many of you feel also like you're just mentally a little bit quieter, a little bit clearer, just more present? Great. Yeah, this is going to take a little bit of practice, but after a while it becomes much, much easier to get into that space. However, in terms of how much practice, how many of you have ever done a mock interview? Excellent. How many, just shout out some numbers, like how many mock interviews did you do? Like 2 or 5 or like 100, like how many? 0? 0? Yeah, that's very common as a number. What are some other numbers? 3? Excellent. I'm just going to take it that it's somewhere between 0 and 3. That's a pretty typical number, actually, but even in terms of like practice performances or practice speeches that you might have to give, we often don't do as many as we would benefit from. So then when we get on stage or we get into a pressure situation, again, whether it's sports, music, or academia, we then don't have our best performances, and we, again, think that, oh, maybe there's something wrong with me, I'm just not experienced enough, or I don't have it in me. But I want to give you a couple examples in music, at least, of how many of these practice performances some folks actually do. So this is David Kim, concertmaster in Philadelphia. How many practice performances of a concerto do you think he'll do if he's been asked to solo with a different orchestra? Again, just shout out some numbers. 8, 50, 15. Okay, so the 50 was excellent because that sort of is a little disappointing because I wanted to give you a big number. It's 30 or 40, so it's not even 50, but 30 or 40, like this is not in his living room for his family. This is going out into the community, finding different places to play for different audiences. It's quite a big commitment, and he'll do 30 or 40 of these. This is Rob Knopper, who's a percussionist in the Met Opera Orchestra, one of the top orchestras in the world. How many mock auditions do you think he did before his Met audition? Again, some numbers. 30, 5, 12. Yeah, so whoever said 30, you're pretty close. He did 42, 1 a day for 6 straight weeks. So again, this is not typical. Most musicians will do a few, like 5, 10 maybe at most. But if it takes someone like Rob or David that many to start feeling comfortable, I think if we feel like we're struggling under pressure, the takeaway for me is not that you have to do 42 mock interviews necessarily, but if you don't feel comfortable after 5 or 10, there's nothing wrong with you at all. It just means maybe you need a few more of those to start getting more comfortable. So yeah, this is it for me. If you have any questions about something that came up, you can always reach me here. Don't try to Instagram me or anything else. I'm very bad at responding to anything other than email. So I will be happy to respond by email, though, if you have a question. Great. All right. Well, thank you.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. I feel so much more centered after your mindful techniques, and I especially was interested in seeing all those cute pictures of pets. Definitely. Coincidentally, our lab, Youth Media Wellbeing Research Lab, actually has a current study about dogs, screen time, and anxiety. So it's actually a combination of things that you can actually research in the world. So I'm here as a research scientist who teaches on the side for fun. And I pretty much focus all of my energy on understanding how adolescents used social technologies, phones, social media, gaming, the works, texting, chatting, and so how many people here are a little bit embarrassed by how much they use social media? A little bit embarrassed, a little bit ashamed, a little bit? Okay, how many people really love their social media and they can't live without it? Anybody? Yeah, I think a lot of people are kind of like, I don't want anybody to know, but it's no, it's no wonder, because in the news, you probably have seen headlines lately. Any headlines about social media, mental well-being, the crisis of adolescence, mental health status, Surgeon General? Have you seen any of that in the news? Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. These headlines are, kind of popping up every day. I get calls from reporters all the time wanting me to comment on how social media is causing, mental health, struggles and breakdowns, and that it's destroying our youth, and no one is knowing exactly what's happening. What are these algorithms? They are attacking, our brains. So it's no wonder that a lot of people are worried and not knowing where to, kind of place what they can do about it. But when you actually look at the research, the journalists sometimes kind of get to a big picture conclusion based on very little data, based on maybe a few studies. But when you look at national data sets that have been tracking social media use over time, you can see that there's actually a lot of positive aspects about social media. And in fact, 80% of US teens aged 13 to 17 think that they're more connected to what's going on in their friends' lives, and they feel more accepted. They feel like it's a place where they have a sense of belonging. And then, of course, there's the negative side. Most people in the media focus on the second part, the negative side, and with every kind of social intervention, technology, there's always some kind of a pro and con, right? Especially with how much you use it or not. 23% feel worse about their life after social media. And so those are the people that, when you're thinking about interventions and trying to figure out where you're going to put your energy into, focusing on, you want to focus on the people that might need are a little bit more vulnerable. It doesn't mean that all adolescents are vulnerable. It's just that some of them are more vulnerable than others. And so my presentation is going to be really about kind of changing the narrative to yes and. So I was actually one of the co-authors of this American Psychological Association task force on social media and mental health. And one of the things that was a big takeaway point is that social media isn't inherently good or bad. It really is a tool that you could use for information gathering. You can find out, who you are and what you're about, and find people online that can accept you for who you are. And everybody comes to it with their own strengths and vulnerabilities. Some people are really good at self-regulation, some people aren't. Some people are really, it's hard for them to not get distracted by social media to do their, do their life responsibilities, and other people, can use it as a coping mechanism, and it's actually a really helpful de-stressor. It's also, a lot of times people assume that social media is a way for you to avoid social interactions, or to be afraid of being with other people. But in this day and age, in your generation, it's actually all blurred boundaries. You're doing your social life online. Digital life is the same online and offline. It's the same, sometimes the same community, sometimes not. And it's a way to practice your social skills. And I think that's often like the opposite of what people think of technology. You're on your phones. There's also a social norm setting and social obligations that are happening on digital life, as you all know. You're all the experts, you're the youth of today. So Surgeon General also mentioned in a very small part of his advisory, which was mainly talking about all the negatives and all the sounding of the alarms, there's this one part in which he mentioned that there needs to be more research on how marginalized youth use social media and how they're affected by social media. Because if you say one thing that, it's all inherently bad, let's try to reduce it down to as little as possible, the people that actually use it for their lifeline and support system, and maybe they have stigmatized mental health conditions, or maybe there's some people that are neurodivergent and they really can only find people that are like them online, then you're giving them the message that you shouldn't be online, get offline, and as if the purpose and intentionality of their use isn't actually something that people consider. Like for instance, if you're going online to see people who look like you, who share your same racial, ethnic backgrounds, your sexual orientation backgrounds, it actually could be very affirming. And so girls in particular, they use social media in ways that are, has been shown to be different, from other genders. There's a lot more social comparison going on. There's a lot more thinking about your self-validation, and your self-worth has to do with who you are online and how you present yourself online. And so for girls especially, there's this thing called availability stress. How many has ever said or thought, oh my gosh, I have to always be online because my friends need me, and if I'm not there for them, then they're gonna be mad at me. We're gonna have they're gonna not think I'm a good enough friend. How many are kind of always on and oh yeah, maybe something happens over the weekend, I wanna be there. I wanna be the person that is there for them if something bad happens. There's that social obligation that is kind of like the norm. There's something that my students yesterday were telling me about location sharing. How many of you are location sharing with your friends because it's a sign that you care about how they're doing, or how they're, are they being safe? Are they walking home in the middle of the night, making sure they get home okay? How many of you are location sharing with? Wow, that's actually more hands went up than anything I've asked about earlier today. Throw out some reasons why you location share with your friends. And do you location share with your parents? How many location share with their parents? Okay. And how about no parents? You're totally off with your parents. Okay. How about your friends? Friends? Yeah. Okay, so tell me some reasons why you're sharing your location. Yes. You like to bother people? Okay, you mean what are you doing over there? How come you're over there? That kind of stuff? Okay, yeah. Yes, just in case, but for your own safety too. You want people to know where you are, and then they can help you. Yes. Anybody else? Anything else besides that? Yeah, go ahead. I can't see. Yeah.
All of my friends go to colleges in different states, so it's just really.
I know, it's almost like a real-time way to feel like you are with them, at the same time. So as I said before, it's a blurred boundary. The digital life, you almost, there's not enough time in the day to actually get in touch and know what everybody's up to. And sometimes location sharing is a nice, it's sometimes, a healthy way, and sometimes, depending on how you're using it, a way to just keep up with things. Okay, so social media fixation, so a lot of them think it's a positive thing, sometimes it's a negative thing because of the algorithms. A lot of times algorithms, just like social media, there's this really negative, assumption about social algorithms in the media right now too, that algorithms are somehow are being the reason why there's so much negative content, happening. But algorithms can also be trained for good. Algorithms can also be trained to show you content that you actually want to see, and that you actually think are interesting and relevant to your lives. And so, some of the issues of today of research in this area is how are they created? Who are the ones creating the code behind algorithms and all the formulas? Things like race-related content. How much are algorithms favoring people of certain beauty standards and certain body types and different races. So I wrote a chapter about marginalized youth using social media in this book up here, and we found that people of kids of color, teens of color, were more likely to join social media to feel less socially isolated, and this was actually before the pandemic, during the pandemic, after the pandemic. It's something that wasn't just because of the social distancing that was occurring, and especially LGBTQ youth find that online networks, sometimes they're only out online, and sometimes they find communities that they could really be themselves even before they even come out to their families and their friends, and that's really important for them. So in my work, there's a lot of, which way do we go? Are we encouraging opportunities on social media, or are we trying to limit risks? And of course, each person that is a part of the village of helping young people on their social media use is probably, both of them are very important, right? And some people are more likely to know more about how to support youth on one or the other. Just like you were saying earlier before, instead of telling people what not to do, like don't look down, sometimes you need to tell them what to do. There's so much in parenting right now about don't do this, don't do that. Like, don't sign up for this social media site. Don't use your phone after this hour. But what is it that they're supposed to be doing? So that will help young people also to kind of empower themselves. So social context matters. There's regional differences. Rural youth might really need social media in order to fulfill that gap that they don't have in person. For people that maybe they're in very conservative communities, and they need to find people to feel safe. In some communities, in urban areas, for youth of color especially, the third space is actually safer online than in person in their actual neighborhoods. So that's important for a lot of adults to kind of grapple with. Neurodivergent youth, sometimes in person, there's this persona that they have that everybody kind of has labeled them as a particular type of person, and sometimes, I'm sure all of you also try to think about the identities that you might be bringing to your online world. You might have different identities. You might have like Finstas, and you have like, you're a different person as on Discord versus person on Facebook versus Instagram. That's how it is for people who are socially anxious too. So sometimes they feel even more confident when they can really think about what they are, projecting online, and not in such a on performance kind of way that is the in-person world. Also, a lot of the suggestions about how to onboard young people, about how to use phones in healthy ways and social media, it assumes that people have traditional families. Like there's two parents that are going to help them and know how to tell them what to do and what not to do, and to tell them, give them the talk over time, in a way that's, developmentally appropriate. Some people don't have that. They might have it, maybe they're learning it from their sibling. How many of you had a sit-down talk with your parents about how to use social media? Anybody? Okay, there's a few of you. How many of you learned from your older siblings or your cousins, or, yeah. How about your friends? Did you learn about it from your friends, maybe? How about teachers? Did teachers teach you about social media? Oh, yeah. That's something that I really hope in the future that we can have, teachers kind of also being taught media literacy skills, social media literacy skills that are so important for today's young people, even younger and younger. And so I wanted to go back to how I was talking about earlier, that a lot of times the media often has a protectionist stance of we need to protect our youth from outside forces that are gonna infiltrate and make them, unhealthy, when in fact, there's also this other stance of empowerment where you can tell them and share that they have the agency to choose the kind of online worlds they want to be a part of, to limit themselves from harm, to like unfriend people that really aren't good for them, or unfollow those celebrities that have unrealistic beauty images, and also how to train your algorithms to be really providing content that you want to see that is relevant to you today. And so there's always a positive and a negative side to all of these things, and I just want to give you some examples of that. So the American Academy of Pediatrics recently came out with a new narrative about social media, that it is developmentally appropriate for all of you to be on social media. It is our risks and benefits for social technology use for everybody of all ages. So adults too have issues on their technology, and they use it for both positive and negative ways, and it's not just a young person thing. And when you actually look at all these different studies across, hundreds of studies that have happened over a decade, sometimes they'll find these significant studies that, with mental health increases, there's, technology use increases. But when you look at how much it explains the variation of mental health effects, it only explains about 0.4% of their well-being. And so when you see the headlines, it's like, causal, nature. Correlation does not equal causation, right? And it explains so little of it. The mental health crisis is being explained by so much more larger forces than people's technology use. It's the socioeconomic status that people are in. There's the climate change that people are really worried about. There's political forces. There's family stress, academic stress. I mean, there's so many other things that explain it, and also the mental health of your parents, of your household. The Surgeon General also came out with a new report that parents are stressed out. Have you seen that? Parents are really stressed out, and yeah, if parents are stressed out, young people can feel that too. And I know you had said you showed a U-shaped curve for the performance kind of anxiety kind of thing. There's a certain amount of anxiety and stress that you want to have, but not too little, not too much. Same thing for social media. It turns out that if you have too much on one end, like too much social media, maybe it's interfering with your sleep and your eating and getting work done, then yeah, that's too much. But then also too little is also you're kind of reducing your opportunities to kind of network and learn more about yourself and identity exploration and that kind of thing. And so this Academy of Pediatricians is saying what doesn't work is a shame-based narrative. And so they're trying to get pediatricians to kind of ask parents and families, during those clinical visits, not to have this narrative of, oh my gosh, you need to be off your phone. Your goal is to be 0 hours. It's more about, okay, how is it fitting in with your life? And if it fits in, okay, then you're good to go. If it's sort of interfering with things that are important, to stay healthy, then let's have a talk. It turns out that one of my studies I had done recently, that even though parents and adults and caregivers like educators and nurses, doctors are the ones that primarily talk to young people about their social media use, and people report not talking to friends as much, when we look at how much it affects their digital citizenship later on and how much they're positive in their communities, it's really the friends that make the most impact. And so that's one kind of point that I wanted to kind of put out there, that if your friends, friends can actually influence each other in positive ways. You know how when people think of peer influence, the first thing that comes to mind is, oh yeah, let's make sure that people don't get, like there's like the drug influence or getting you hooked on things that you shouldn't be hooked on. But there's also the power of positive peer influence. And so I developed these digital well-being workshops for girls, in particular in adolescence and tween and teen years. And I just really wanted to make sure that we got the young people at a certain very sensitive, critical developmental time period in the tween years when they're about to they're getting their phones, or maybe they're the first time on their phones, first time social media use. They're actually really thinking about their self-concept, at this point, about their confidence level. For girls, increase is the highest point in their entire life when they're 9. And somehow when they're entering middle school, it starts to wane and it just never gets back to where it used to be when they were 9. And so that's something that we wanted to like empower young girls, especially about how they can also design the future technology and social media worlds that they really want. And so that's why we started to develop these workshops, and I was going to show you some slides about what they've done and what we're trying to do with digital well-being, this concept that either educators or parents might not be as familiar with, to really deliver this. And so we have these workshops for a week long. They're free to anybody that has internet access. It's a virtual workshop. And we really want to make sure that people know that they can be part of this future ecosystem of digital technologies, and they can be STEM innovators, and they can help us figure out what kind of algorithms, to create to help keep everybody nice and, empowered. We also have a youth advisory board, which I really recommend for anybody doing work with youth. We have middle schoolers and high schoolers helping us figure out what the theme of each year should be, because we have to keep timely. We have to keep relevant to adolescent lives. I heard that last year your Context conference was about AI. Look, last year we also decided it was going to be about AI and body image. That was what we wanted to focus on. That's what the youth said that they wanted to know more about. And this year, because of the election year, we focused on community and empowerment. Here's like a week-long overview of what we did every day. We actually snuck in a little bit more AI because it's never going to go away. It's going to be something that we're probably going to talk about a little bit every year. We kind of go through media literacy and power of influencers and how you can be an influencer as well. And we go into these small groups, and at the end of the week, they create a prototype of what a positive, social media platform could look like for the positive well-being. And then we invite people from the social media platform industry. We got like Google to come, we got Meta to come, and they were scribbling down lots of notes about what the young people think would be important for them to think about. Because how many people think that these social media companies actually ask youth about what they want on social media platforms? I mean, they're pretty much, prototyping on adults, and that's something that we're trying to shake that up. And so if you look at these different grade levels, we had these groups by grade levels, and these are the designs that they came up with about more positive social media use. And so a lot of them were talked about, designing algorithms that, really helped help their body positivity, for instance. They also wanted more check-ins about maybe little surveys about what do they care about, what is their mood right now, so that the algorithm isn't just trying to guess it. They kind of wanted people to actually be asked, can you just ask me what I want to see instead of just guess that I really care about this feed that you're constantly putting into me. And they really wanted to more content moderation, about sensitive content, and so they got to design on Canva, and so it was just really empowering experience to them. The facilitators are the college students, and so it's an intergenerational design where the college students are mentoring the high school, and the high school mentoring the middle school students. And here are some reflections of the mentors who also gained a new appreciation of how young people today are using things in ways that are so creative, and you can't even get them to get off of these devices anymore, but they're actually very intelligent and thoughtful. And it just reminds us that every couple years, the technology is constantly moving and changing, and the use of it is also changing. And we have to be on top of it, and research needs to continue to be mindful of this change. And so these are my acknowledgments. I have all these funders, and thank you so much for inviting me. I do have an Instagram account because it's a lab about social media, and it's all research findings. And actually, next week we have an Instagram takeover of the youth talking about National Emotional Depression Awareness Month, and that's my website. And you can also email me too. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, panelists, come up. We have about 15 minutes for the Q&A. There's a mic here, so you could walk up here, and there's also 2 mics that'll go around. So please feel free, and stay with us for another 15 minutes, please. Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, please come on.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
This one? I don't want it to make that noise. Hello? Can you hear me? Okay. Hi, my question is regarding the one from Julliard. Can you pronounce your name for me so I say it right?
Noah is fine.
Noah's fine?
Yeah.
Okay, hello Noah. My name is Stephanie and I am a sophomore and I am a part of the social work major. But to be a little vulnerable here, I deal with anxiety pretty thoroughly on a daily basis. And I saw on your 2 graphs that you put about mental, how we perform better at a calm state and then physical is better, it's kind of like a U shape. So I remember when I was younger, I used to only focus on the physical, which really did not help regarding my performance in anything of any matter, because I was an athlete and I used to play the violin when I was younger as well, and it used to really affect my performance in that. But I realized that when I focused more on my mental rather than just how I'm physically feeling, I saw that there was a direct correlation, at least in my life, of how the physical symptoms dissipated. I know that you say they're different. I know that your graphs, when you put them together, they were different. But I wanted to know if that, as you further studied these concepts, were you able to find a direct correlation of how when you handle the mental health, if it dissipates the physical symptoms as well?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. And it's a great observation because, yeah, one of the nice things that happens when we tend to be more focused on trying to keep our mind in the most effective place where we're present, we're not worrying about the future, we're not beating ourselves up for the past, and we're really focused on what we control in this moment. Like you said, a lot of times the physical stuff tends to fade away. It's not like it disappears and we're like completely calm physically, but it becomes more like excitement as opposed to anxiety. And there's actually a lot of interesting work, as you probably know, with threat versus challenge states. When we approach something, whether it's a performance or an athletic event or an interview, as a challenge that we can overcome, and we believe we have the capacity and the skills and experience to overcome, it feels very different, both mentally, emotionally, physically, than if we approach it like it's a threat of some kind. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Maddie. I'm a junior and I'm a secondary education and English major. And my question is kind of the both of you about how can we incorporate this in the classroom, like putting mental health and anxiety first, especially when it comes to social media. I feel like if I had more of an education on what that could look like for teenagers, especially because I want to do like high school, like how can we put that first to make sure that they're also learning about themselves while learning about our content areas? Because I feel like now I'm getting more into it, like with this conference and everything, but how can we do it before college so that they're like developing with it, if that makes sense? That's my question.
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think in general, media literacy is in the same category of marginalization in the schools, like social emotional learning. So how many of you actually went through a social emotional learning program, like in secondary school? And strangely enough, there is a movement to problematize social emotional learning as if it's not as important as academics. So some school districts actually actively do not include social emotional learning because their parents are more focused on, no, we need to focus on academic learning and subject learning. And a lot of times the social emotional learning kind of ends around elementary school, and then it just kind of fades away in middle school and high school when it is very relevant, right? Because their lives turn into, there's a lot more stress, there's a lot more anxiety, and reasons to ways to fall through the cracks. But a lot of teachers aren't trained or expected to support their students socially and emotionally, like in terms of their actual trained background. And so it really depends on the community of people at your school. Like you have a school nurse, if you have social work, you have mental health screenings. If those are things that could help out. Having a committee formed at schools that really look at it in a very interdisciplinary way, like, okay, from the academic side, if something's happening academically, maybe it's because of a social emotional thing, maybe it's because they need an IEP or a 504, or, some kind of special plan to give them extra time on tests, or maybe reconsider the kind of rules that you have in the school about how much you can use your phone or not. Can you use your phone in a pocket, hanging on the door, or is it something you can pull out during lunch? And how does it affect, performance and, schoolwork?
I don't know if this addresses your question in the way that you might have been wanting or looking for, but one thing that occurs to me is, and I think from a young age, whether it's a book report or whether it's getting up to do some spelling in front of the class or answer a math problem, we have these little mini performances that we do feel anxious about a lot of times from an early age. And I think one thing that can be helpful if it happens sooner is for students and young folks to understand that this doesn't have to be anxiety necessarily. It's sort of what we talked about a little bit ago with threat versus challenge states. Alison Woodbrooks is on the faculty at Harvard Business School and did a lot of really interesting research on how we attribute what we're experiencing internally to either anxiety or excitement, because those two physically are very similar states. And so even for all of you, if when you're in a position of having to perform, instead of being like, oh, I'm so anxious, I need to calm down, if instead you understand, like we looked at earlier, that some degree of physical activation can actually be useful to your performance. She had, singers, or not people singing, but people singing in a karaoke situation with money at stake and a judge involved and high stakes math testing and public speaking. She had some groups tell themselves before they performed, I'm anxious, and other groups were told to tell themselves, I'm excited, and then other groups were told anything at all, and the groups that said I'm excited consistently across all these different kinds of performances performed better and had a better experience of it. So again, even for little kids getting up in front of a class to do something, if as part of before they do these things, they're trained a little bit or given some opportunities to practice this mantra of I'm excited, that could be a helpful way of, from an early age, trying to experience these things as excitement as opposed to anxiety.
I love that idea of having lessons at a young age about how to recognize excitement and nervousness as a potentially positive thing, because sometimes stress is actually, to a certain point on your body, is a positive thing because it helps activate you, it helps you get your energy going, but then too much of it, where do you draw the line? But,
Okay, maybe while some of you are thinking of a question, I have one for both of you. How do you respond to the argument that I can multitask, I'm on social media, and able to listen to your lecture?
I mean, our brain, does compartmentalize things, but in the end, you're really focused on one thing at a time. There's really no actual, literal multitasking. There's reduced attention on different compartments, and so how well you can, move to center certain compartments, and how quickly you can do it depends on, what your goal is too. If you only want to be there kind of like mid, you're just here mid, or do you want to be really focused and in the present? I really liked how you were trying to get us to really let go of whatever you have in your lap and just think about here and now in the present, not the past and the future, and how it opened up our brains to just, be more here in the now, and that was just so powerful. Instead of always kind of being mid good at, paying attention to this versus that, or your phone or the lecture.
Yeah, no, it's a tough thing to sell. I struggle with my kids as well at various ages, and I think for me, maybe the argument is do you want to spend more time doing homework because you're too distracted doing other things, or do you want to get it done faster and better and move on to other things and really devote yourself to having more fun in other ways? I mean, just as an example of how we really don't multitask very well. I don't know if you're up for this, but I want you to sing Old MacDonald Had a Farm in your head, or the Happy Birthday song, or ABC, whatever. So in your head, but simultaneously now out loud, I'd like you to count backwards from 100 in threes, so 197, 94, right? So start singing in your head. Now all together, 100, 97. How many of you are finding that the singing has stopped? It's just, yeah, it's really tough. And then the math starts getting sketchy too, right? So it's hard to do.
Okay. The challenge is to let go, right? Thank you. Thank you. Any more questions? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, my name's Brian. I'm a freshman here at William Patterson as a music education major for classical voice. My question is for Dr. Charmaraman. Sorry, how do you pronounce that?
Charmaraman?
Hmm?
Charmaraman?
Charmaraman. It's regarding a conversation I tend to have with a lot of people my age about wanting to have kids when we're older. At what age is it appropriate to let our kids have a phone? Essentially, at what age is social media finally appropriate, and maybe to what capacity? What is your take on that conversation, on that question about when it is appropriate?
It's a very common question, and thank you for bringing that up. The average age in the U.S. right now of getting your first phone is 10.3. And so that's like 4th grade, you know, so imagine there's people that are like in kindergarten getting it and versus like high school, you know, there's a wide range. And my answer is that it's not the same age for everybody and every family. You know, even within the same family, even siblings will have a different age at which they mature enough to, and have self-regulation skills enough and not be too distracted or get too concerned about the drama, you know, about not being on the texting chain or that kind of thing. It really depends on what is the purpose of getting the phone, and like sometimes people will onboard, just start it off because of safety reasons. You know, they want to be able to get you after school and pick you up on a certain time, and so it's very logistical reasons. And then of course, but the phone is a door to the universe. You know, it's got the Google, it's got like the internet at their fingertips, and I would say that what I would advise people to do is to remember that you don't have to give the keys to the whole universe in the beginning, like kind of let them have limited access from the beginning so that they can really hone their skills on how it affects them. If they're on YouTube too many hours at night, then they probably need curfews and things like that. But I would say that the more you have conversations about its use, over time and how it does change as your social life changes and your goals in life change, that it's never something where you just, here you go, here's the keys to the car, go ahead and start driving. It's the same thing if you're teaching a kid how to drive. It's not a one time lesson. It's they get better and better as they get older. They start realizing that there are dangers, but also there's a lot of benefits to knowing how to drive in a safe way, just like at the phone.
For that very insightful and interactive session, thank you, Dr. Kageyama and Dr. Charmaraman. Thank you very much. Join me in thanking them. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I know, it's